So today I want to go over a glitch in Diablo 4 that will essentially allow you to turn a nightmare dungeon into an infinite loot cave with permanent magic find. And the method to activate this glitch is incredibly simple. All you're going to need is the nightmare sigil that you want to be farming. Once you have that, you're going to activate that nightmare sigil and then go enter that nightmare dungeon. Once you've entered the dungeon, you're going to leave and go to any other normal dungeon. Doesn't matter what dungeon you go to. And once you're in that normal dungeon, you're going to complete the first objective of that normal dungeon. After you've completed the first objective of the normal dungeon, you're then going to leave that and go re-enter the nightmare dungeon. And at this point, the glitch will be active. Now, all you're going to do to continuously farm the nightmare dungeon is to only complete the first couple objectives in the nightmare dungeon. But you can't fully complete the nightmare dungeon. If you fully complete it and get the bubble at the end, the glitch will now be gone. So you're going to go in the nightmare dungeon and complete either the first or the first two objectives. Then you're going to teleport to the entrance of the dungeon, either by going to your map and clicking on the entrance or bringing up your emote wheel and clicking leave dungeon. And once you're outside of the dungeon, you're just going to load back into the dungeon and it will reset. And that's all you're going to be doing. You're going to go in there, complete the first couple objectives, make sure not to complete the dungeon, leave the dungeon, re-enter the dungeon, rinse and repeat. Now that's the basics of the glitch, but you can massively increase the efficiency of farming whatever dungeon you're in by a few different methods. First off, you're going to want to find a dungeon that has some decent density and that your build is good at farming and that primarily has a lot of elite enemies. And you're primarily going to learn this by just running a bunch of different dungeons and knowing some dungeons that are really good for your build. Now, some that are generally good for a lot of different builds are Champion's Demise, Moggon's Works, and even something like Blind Burrows. Those ones are generally good for most builds and are usually just pretty high density dungeons. So that's the first part of optimizing this glitch. But the second part is getting that nightmare dungeon sigil to have the magic find buff on it. And if you've never seen this, every nightmare sigil has a buff at the top in green that will give your character some type of buff, whether it be increased critical strike chance or just some base damage increase. But the rarest buff you can get is called magic find. And this will increase the amount of items you get from killing enemies. And this is the main one you're going to want, because once you have a really good nightmare sigil with magic find on it, you can just spam refarm the first part of this nightmare dungeon infinitely, meaning the dungeon is always going to have magic find, basically turning this nightmare dungeon into an infinitely farmable loot cave with higher drops than you can get anywhere else in the game. And likewise, if you're trying to farm up gold, there's also a buff you can get on nightmare sigils that gives you 30% increased gold. So if you're looking for gold, you could also get a nightmare sigil that has that buff instead of magic find, and you'll be able to farm up quite a lot of gold as well. Now, if you're not level 100, you're going to be wanting to gain a lot of XP while doing this. And there's two ways you can maximize the amount of XP you're going to get. First off, you're going to want to be facing enemies at least 3 levels above your level, because if you don't know, enemies above your level give you increased experience for killing them. And this caps out at enemies being 3 levels above you, which will give you 25% increased experience. So you're going to want enemies to at least be 3 levels above you. And if you can get the sweet spot of them being exactly 3 levels above you, that's going to be the most optimal, but being 4, 5, 6 levels above you isn't going to be the biggest of deals. And then you're also going to want to have an elixir active the entirety of the time you're farming this, because that's going to give you 5% increased experience. And since you don't need to leave the game to reset the dungeon, you just have to leave the dungeon and re-enter it, you're not going to be losing your elixir buff, so you're just going to be able to have 30% increased experience the entirety of the time you're farming this newly created loot cave. Now, it may take quite a lot of time to find the right nightmare dungeon to do this farm with, but I would say don't be picky with the first dungeon you're going to be farming through this glitch, because even if you have a half decent nightmare sigil that you want to go do this glitch with, you're going to be getting a ton of nightmare sigil drops as you're doing this glitch farm, because enemies in nightmare dungeons can just randomly drop sigils. So as you're doing this glitch farm from a non-optimal nightmare sigil, you're going to be getting a bunch more that could potentially give you that perfect nightmare sigil to give you the most optimal loot cave farming. But that's pretty much the entirety of this glitch. I would definitely recommend doing this. It's definitely going to get fixed probably in the next couple days. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
not ready yet.